The meaning of the Crusades. Excerpted from Metaphysics of War. Battle, Victory, and Death in the World of Tradition. Julius Evola. 1935. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Let us resume our examination of those traditions concerning heroism in which war is regarded as a path of spiritual realization in the strictest sense of the term, and thus acquires a transcendent justification and purpose. We have already discussed the conceptions of the ancient Roman world in this respect. We then described the Nordic traditions regarding the immortalizing character of the truly heroic death on the battlefield. It was necessary to examine these traditions before considering the medieval world, since, as is generally recognized, the Middle Ages, as a culture, arose from the synthesis of three elements: firstly, Roman, secondly, Nordic, and thirdly, Christian. Thus, we are now in a position to examine the idea of the sacredness of war as the Western medieval age knew and cultivated it. As should be evident, we here refer to the Crusades as understood in their deepest sense, not the sense claimed by historical materialists, according to which they are mere effects of economical and ethnic determinisms, nor the sense claimed by developed minds, according to which they are mere phenomena of superstition and religious exaltation, nor, finally, will we even regard them as simply Christian phenomena. In respect to this last point, it is necessary not to lose sight of the correct relationship between means and ends. It is often said that, in the Crusades, the Christian faith made use of the heroic spirit of Western chivalry. However, the opposite is the truth, that is to say, the Christian faith, and the relative and contingent imperatives of the religious struggle against the infidel and the liberation of the Temple and Holy Land, were merely the means which allowed the heroic spirit to manifest itself, to affirm itself, and to realize a sort of ascesis, distinct from that of the contemplative, but no less rich in spiritual fruits. Most of the knights who gave their energies and their blood for the holy war had only the vaguest ideas and the sketchiest theological knowledge regarding the doctrine for which they fought. However, the cultural context of the Crusades contained a wealth of elements able to confer upon them a higher, spiritually symbolic meaning. Transcendent myths resurfaced from the subconscious in the soul of Western chivalry. The conquest of the Holy Land located beyond the sea was much more closely associated than many people have imagined with the ancient saga according to which in the distant east, where the sun rises, lies the sacred city where death does not exist, and the fortunate heroes who are able to reach it enjoy celestial serenity and perpetual life. Moreover, the struggle against Islam had, by its nature and from its inception, the significance of an ascetic test. This was not merely a struggle for the kingdoms of the earth, wrote the famous historian of the Crusades, Kugler, but a struggle for the kingdom of heaven. The Crusades were not a thing of men, but rather of God, therefore, they should not be thought of in the same way as other human events. Sacred war, according to an old chronicler, should be compared to a bath like that in the fire of purgatory, but before death. Those who died in the Crusades were compared symbolically by popes and priests to gold tested 3 times and refined 7 times in the fire, a purifying ordeal so powerful that it opened the way to the Supreme Lord. Never forget this oracle, wrote Saint Bernard, whether we live, or whether we die, we belong to the Lord. It is a glory for you never to leave the battle unless covered with laurels. But it is an even greater glory to earn on the battlefield an immortal crown, O fortunate condition, in which death can be approached without fear, waited for with impatience, and received with a serene heart. It was promised that the Crusader would attain an absolute glory, gloria absolu, in the Provençal tongue, and that he would find rest in paradise conquer lit en paradis. That is to say, he would achieve the superlife, the supernatural state of existence, something beyond religious representation. In this respect, Jerusalem, the coveted goal of the conquest, appeared in a double aspect, as an earthly city and as a symbolic, celestial and intangible city, and the crusade gained an inner value independent of all outer integuments, supports and apparent motives. Besides, the greatest contribution in manpower was supplied to the Crusades by knightly orders such as the Templars and the Knights of St. John, which were made up of men who, like the monk or the Christian ascetic, had learned to despise the vanity of this life, warriors weary of the world, who had seen everything and enjoyed everything, withdrew into such orders, thus making themselves ready for an absolute action, free from the interests of common, temporal life, and also of political life in the narrow sense. Urban VIII addressed chivalry as the supranational community of those who were ready to run to war wherever it might break out, and to bring to it the fear of their arms in defense of honor and of justice. They should answer the call to sacred war all the more readily, according to one of the writers of the time, since its reward is not an earthly fief, always revocable and contingent, but a celestial fief. Moreover, the course of the Crusades, with all its broader implications for the general ideology of the time, led to a purification and internalization of the spirit of the enterprise. Given the initial conviction that the war for the true faith could not but have a victorious result, the first military setbacks undergone by the Crusader armies were a source of surprise and dismay, but, in the end, they served to bring to light the higher aspect of sacred ver. The unhappy fate of a crusade was compared by the clerics of Rome to the misfortunes of virtue, which are made good only in another life. But, by taking this approach, they were already close to recognizing something superior to both victory and defeat, and to according the highest importance to the distinctive aspect of heroic action which is accomplished independently of any visible and material fruits, almost in the sense of an offering, which draws, from the virile sacrifice of all human elements, the immortalizing absolute glory. One sees that in this way they approached a plane that was super-traditional, in the most strict, historical and religious sense of the word tradition. The particular religious faith, the immediate purposes, the antagonistic spirit, were revealed clearly as mere means, as inessential in themselves, as the precise nature of a fuel which is used for the sole purpose of reviving and feeding a flame. What remained at the center, however, was the sacred value of war. Thus it became possible to recognize that the opponents of the moment accorded to battle the same traditional meaning. In this way, and despite everything, the Crusades were able to enrich the cultural exchange between the Gibelline West and the Arabic East, itself the center of more ancient traditional elements, an exchange whose significance is much greater than most historians have yet recognized. As the knights of the crusading orders found themselves in the presence of knights of Arab orders which were almost their doubles, manifesting correspondences in ethics, customs, and sometimes even symbols, so the sacred ver which had impelled the two civilizations against each other in the name of their respective religions, led them at the same time to meet, that is to say, to realize that, despite having as starting points two different faiths, they had eventually accorded to war the identical, independent value of spirituality. In our next article, we shall study the way in which, from the premises of his faith, the ancient Arab knight ascended to the same super-traditional point which the Crusader knight attained by his heroic asceticism. For now, however, we would like to deal with a different point. Those who regard the Crusades, with indignation, as among the most extravagant episodes of the Dark Middle Ages, have not even the slightest suspicion that what they call religious fanaticism was the visible sign of the presence and effectiveness of a sensitivity and decisiveness, the absence of which is more characteristic of true barbarism. In fact, the man of the Crusades was able to rise, to fight and to die for a purpose which, in its essence, was super-political and superhuman, and to serve on a front defined no longer by what is particularistic, but rather by what is universal. This remains a value, an unshakable point of reference. Naturally, this must not be misunderstood to mean that the transcendent motive may be used as an excuse for the warrior to become indifferent, to forget the duties inherent in his belonging to a race and to a fatherland. This is not at all our point, which concerns rather the essentially deeply disparate meanings according to which actions and sacrifices can be experienced, despite the fact that, from the external point of view, they may be absolutely the same. There is a radical difference between the one who engages in warfare simply as such, and the one who simultaneously engages in sacred ver and finds in it a higher experience, both desired and desirable for the spirit. We must add that, although this difference is primarily an interior one, nevertheless, because the powers of interiority are able to find expression also in exteriority, effects derive from it also on the exterior plane, specifically in the following respects. First of all, in an indomitability of the heroic impulse, the one who experiences heroism spiritually is pervaded with a metaphysical tension, an impetus, whose object is infinite, and which, therefore, will carry him perpetually forward, beyond the capacity of one who fights from necessity, fights as a trade, or is spurred by natural instincts or external suggestion. Secondly, the one who fights according to the sense of sacred ver is spontaneously beyond every particularism and exists in a spiritual climate which, at any given moment, may very well give rise and life to a supranational unity of action. This is precisely what occurred in the Crusades when princes and dukes of every land gathered in the heroic and sacred enterprise, regardless of their particular utilitarian interests or political divisions, bringing about for the first time a great European unity, true to the common civilization and to the very principle of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, in this respect as well, if we are able to leave aside the integument, if we are able to isolate the essential from the contingent, we will find an element whose precious value is not restricted to any particular historical period. To succeed in referring heroic action also to an ascetic plane, and in justifying the former according to the latter, is to clear the road towards a possible new unity of civilization, to remove every antagonism conditioned by matter, to prepare the environment for great distances and for great fronts, and, therefore, to adapt the outer purposes of action gradually to its new spiritual meaning, when it is no longer a land and the temporal ambitions of a land for which one fights, but a superior principle of civilization, a foreshadowing of what, even though itself metaphysical, moves ever forward, beyond every limit, beyond every danger, beyond every destruction.